All right, ladies and gents, welcome back to Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric. And today I have a special guest. I say that a lot, but this dude is really the first figure that indoctrinated a lot of what I know about police work, what I think about police work. Um, Kind of the man, the myth, the legend. And if you're from around here or you're from around somewhere far away, you may know him as Bill Blowers. Bill, thank you for being on the show, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me,
Yeah. So how's life been in retirement?
dude. It's great, man. I highly recommend retirement. It's pretty dang awesome. So yeah, I got nothing to complain about. Doing well. My wife is healthy. My kids are healthy. My grandkids are healthy. Things are great. I got no complaints across the board.
Yeah, I want to focus on that for a little bit, and maybe we'll come back to it. But you're retired, but you're not. You're very busy, and I think that's key. I mean, we hear a lot about that.
Before we jump into that, man, your intro was. My relationship with you is fairly long, right? I mean, we worked together for a long time, known each other a long time. But you always seemed very stoic to me, at least when I was around you. And so to hear you say that I gave you your start on policing or whatever, I'm curious what you meant by that, and what was that impact? Because I don't recall.
Yeah,
I don't feel like I ever had an impact on Eric Tongue at all. You know what I mean?
I think you had an impact on a lot of people. So I'll say this, and I was kind of imagining the conversation would go here, but I talk a lot about my entry into police work, especially being a recruiter and the recruiting sergeant now. And I didn't know anything about police work until I started learning about it to become a cop. There's a lot of people in that vein, right? They see what's on the news, they see what's on the street, and they want to do something about it. So that was a little bit about me. But when you enter such a different culture, I mean, that was a very different culture for me, right? So there's a lot about you that was kind of like a caricature in all the cool ways. But I remember coming in to report to the training center. You're going to be with Officer at the time, Blowers, and I came in and you were, I mean, kind of what I expected. If it was like, oh yeah, this ex-military, fast-paced SWAT dude. How you talked, how you carried yourself. Like I was like, man, I don't know anything about this world, but he's my first purview in. But it's kind of like Captain America with a potty mouth. So anyone that knows you will probably agree. But I want to tell one quick story in that, like, this is one thing that really stuck with me. Well, a couple things. One is that I wasn't lifting many weights once I started testing, because I was like, man, you're doing a hell of push-ups and you're running in academy. It's not the case anymore. You don't even have to run for the test. You know that. But I felt like I was getting back into my endurance. But man, like one of those days, you're like, all right, PT, let's go. And we take off down the street and we're going on the trails around this fire station. And then you just kept getting farther and farther. And I was like, this guy has me, right? And anything, you're pretty built. You're a strong, solid dude. And I was really skinny, especially when I started. Especially because I wasn't lifting, right? And then so I felt like I had nothing on your gas tank. And so I was very impressed in all these different directions. But one story I want to tell, because I'll kick myself if I forget, but it was my introduction to firearms. And you are definitely a firearms expert, guru. That's what you do now. That's what you've been doing your whole career. But I'd never shot a gun, right? And I remember, even though you were very intense, and I think everyone would label you that way, not as it's not a knock. It's just how you are. You function quickly and effectively. But I was kind of nervous, right? I was like, hey, I never fired a gun. You're like, cool. And there's like no judgment, right? Even though you're intense, you're very matter of fact. I think that's one thing that was amazing about our firearms staff and continues on, is like you take a thing that could be intimidating and you make it not intimidating, because that's how you're an effective teacher. If people are intimidated, then you're not getting across anything that you need to. And one of the things was just very matter of fact, hey, you left-handed or right-handed? I was like, well, I'm left-handed, but I can learn whatever. You're like, nope, you're left-handed then. You're left eye dominant. Okay, cool, let's go. And then I remember specifically one of the first fundamentals, and just taking apart the firearm, looking at it. And you took it apart, you stripped it down. And I don't know if you did this with everyone, but you taught me how to function check, and you taught me how to make sure it was empty. And you're like, okay, the gun's empty, right? I'm like, yep. He's like, gun's empty. You're clear on that? Yep. It's like, all right. and you pointed at me. You're like, look down the barrel of that gun. How's it feel? I'm like, it doesn't feel good, man. You're like, okay. Remember that when you point a loaded gun at people, it doesn't feel good. And whether they did something right, whether they did something wrong, whether the wrong person, right person, this is a heavy responsibility. You are carrying a heavy load with your sworn oath. And you kind of just got into what the job was, but just to tell this, 21-year-old kid, hey, this is the real deal. And that stuck with me. And I think that was really important when you think about how people do policing, why you do it, how you interact with people.
That's it. I don't remember that at all. And I'm sure at that time I probably did that with everybody coming through. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe just something struck me about it. I have been saying that for a long time. I think the job and the gun and the fact that we are arresting, or you are now arresting violent people and that kind of thing, the frequency with which a loaded gun gets pointed at folks for good reason, it almost makes you immune to it to some degree. You know what I mean? And I think that's not necessarily a good thing, man. So, I mean, I can't remember pointing the gun at you. You're saying I did, so I presume I must have done so, which, by the way, for a lot of people, it freaks them out. But in my early days of law enforcement, we didn't have simunitions and force on force, so we just cleared guns and did that all the time, which is probably fucking dumb. Can I curse?
Scary, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Can I curse?
Sure.
Okay.
I didn't want, I want you to be your most authentic self, and it's simple. Right. I'll just check the box that says contains explicit info. I kind of thought a lot of people have dropped a little, bomb here or there, but I kind of felt like it would be disingenuous to ask you not to.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it in check. But anyway, I mean, I still bring that up in classes to this day, the LE classes. And I mean, I don't point guns at them, but I always mention that. And, it's an uncomfortable feeling, man. And who here would want me to do that to you? And nobody raised their hand, of course. And I go, well, then remember that, man, right? Do it when you must, right? When there's good reason for it. But absent that, we shouldn't just be doing that haphazardly, because it's a big deal. I think it's a big deal, anyway.
Yeah. And I mean, we all know how flawed memory can be. I built it up to be this thing. You might have asked me to point at myself. I don't know. Like, I just remember the lesson was it's an uncomfortable feeling, right? There's no bullets in there. We've talked about this 3 times over, right? 2 men have checked it. But it stuck with me, right?
Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad you got something from me. What we worked together, like 15 years or some damn thing. You got one thing from me.
Well, I'm going on 16 years this summer. And how long you been retired now?
It's just over 5.
Okay. Yeah.
So I really 10 years only. It seemed like I guess you are the veteran now. You are the man. I'm
a dinosaur now. We were just talking about some other guy that you may or may not remember, but no, yeah, you'd remember him. But anyway, not to name drop him, but me and another sergeant were talking about this guy who's done, he's in detectives now. He's been on like 7-8 years. We didn't know for sure, but he's a veteran, right? He's old school now. That's kind of the times.
Pretty weird. Yeah. Pretty weird stuff, man, for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned me being stoic. I mean, I wonder if your memory is before or after the first time you chewed me out.
I don't ever remember chewing you out.
Oh, you chewed me out. It was it was all misunderstanding. I wrote an email to, and this is partially memory lane, partially for all the new peeps listening, but be cognizant of your email tone or how it could be read, right? You write the email, you read it different ways, but for sure it was one of those. I wrote an email and I CC'd you, so it wasn't like I was trying to hide anything, but it was to, our finance people. And I was told, Academy, you need all this gear. And I didn't have it, right? Because we're kind of thrown into Academy. There's an opening, and you're like, hey, it'll be fine. And you weren't available, but the civilians were like, hey, it's fine. They don't care. And I'm like, I'm gonna make Kent look bad. I'm gonna make me look bad. I'm gonna be embarrassed. Blauer's gonna be mad. I need this stuff. And they're like, you don't need it. And I was like, they told me I need it. And this is kind of an email where I'm trying to be respectful, but I think I'm gonna get in trouble. You circled back and you left a voicemail, and it was like, Tongue, call me back. We need to talk about your email. And then that was it. And I was like, oh shit, I just lost my job. I lost my job. Like, this was a really quick run. I literally just started Academy. And then I was trying to call you. It was after hours. I called your cell, and finally you get back. You're like, hey, I heard your voicemail. I reread the email. I can see how the tone was different than how I might have read it or someone else might have read it. So you're good. And then later, Sergeant visited me at Academy and boarded me for the same thing. So I learned pretty quick that, hey man, like, you might get it a couple times, and so that probably informed your stoic memory of me, because after that I was like, you're not going to hear a thing from me until I'm
Could
off
be.
probation,
It could be. I
which is
remember that from
wise.
your whole time, though, man. It was. I mean, you just were always just kind of a dude that I could see wheels were spinning, right, as information being put out, or what. I mean, not just for me, but just in general. Wheels are spinning. You're obviously taking in the information and processing and deciding what you want to do with it. But I don't know. Maybe just did you ever work on a squad I was on or anything, or
I don't think
no?
so. I think I overlapped when you're like early swing or something. I was on day
Maybe so.
shift, but yeah, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, that's my nature, right? I'm very analytical. I think it was one of my recognized things I wanted to curb. And I remember hitting you up too, being a SWAT team leader and so many years on the team. I remember just asking, hey, how do you make decisions more quickly? Because I want to be canine. And I was like, well, this is a QB role. This is a decide now. Like, we can mull things over later or debrief it later. And what you said to me was, a good plan now, or some version of this, a good plan now is better than the best plan later. And I teach that now, right? Like my recruits and FTO, and now being a hiring sergeant and then temporary training sergeant, I was like, hey, for you people in your brain, you second thinkers and you overthinkers, like, get over that, because sometimes you only have seconds or fractions. And as long as you're trained well, as long as you played it through your head, like, you'll probably come out at a good result.
Yeah. Yep. That's a patent quote, by the way.
Ah,
Yeah.
look at that.
I totally jacked that from him. I'm sure I told you at the time. You probably didn't remember that part. You thought it was just me being all
You
sage. And
you may have, but it's yours now. So, uh, yeah, man. But people that don't know you, I'm sure they already have a sense about you. But wondering if you can share, your path into a life of service, military, policing, and then even what you do now and what you've been doing.
so it's for whatever reason, when I was as a little kid, I remember watching the TV show SWAT, the original one, not the corny one these days. And I'm sure the original was probably corny as hell now if I watch it. But seeing that show and just thinking, man, that's a really cool job, and look what those guys are doing. Obviously, it was fictional, but I'm a little kid, so I don't know any better. Um, and so that part was always kind of interesting to me as I got older. Just not necessarily SWAT specifically, but just being a police officer just sounded like a great job. Particularly for the type of learner that I am, very hands-on type of thing. Probably like a lot of people, I had a bunch of dumb jobs as a teenager, trying to make a few bucks to do whatever, and just the monotony of some of those jobs was another thing I think that drew me toward the profession of law enforcement. Because of course everything you hear about it, and cops that I would talk to would be like, it's always changing. It's every day's a different day. That within an agency, you can be in patrol or detectives or traffic or canine or SWAT or all these different things that you could jump around on and kind of change up your day to day and get that new job feeling again and stay refreshed. So all that was interesting to me. When I got out of graduated from high school, I went to college for a bit. Quickly figured out that was not for me at that time, and I think probably just being as a young man, undisciplined guy, and just not wanting to, get into the books. And, all of a sudden it became more about the beer and the parties and that kind of thing. But I recognized I was getting into some trouble and maybe hanging around with some stuff that was not going to be conducive to what I wanted out of life. And so I remember coming home from court. It was traffic court. But I had just gotten fired from my job and coming back from court, and the judge said, nah, it's going on your record and you're paying the full amount, so get the heck on out here. And I stopped at the red light in Parkland, heading to Graham, where I grew up, and the Army recruiting office is right there. So I thought, well, I'm going to go in here and see what these guys have to say about it. So I went in there with the thought of going in as an MP, because I thought that might give me some resume toward the future. And so I did the test and all, and they said, yeah, you qualify for MPs. You'll leave in 8 months. And I remember thinking, that is insufficient. I said flat out, what do you have in the next 2 weeks? And so they gave me the few choices. And so off I went to the Army. I think that the Army, you point at certain things in your life, right? I mean, obviously I grew up in a military family. My dad was in the Army for 32 years, and that influence and how he raised us, and, kind of a disciplinarian, and, expectations on, these are the things you'll do around the house as well as in school and other crap. I mean, I don't think you realize what that impact is as you're going through it. And so I point a lot to the Army. My time in the Army is developing me into kind of who I am today and who I was as a copper. And so, going into that very obvious, regimented, discipline oriented type of thing. And, if your ribbon's got to be put on exactly right and all that kind of crap, attention to detail. I do remember leaving Washington, heading to Kentucky for basic training. And as I'm sitting in the airport and, kind of thinking, what have I done? I'm on the hook now for 4 years because I did a 4-year enlistment. But I remember saying, nobody knows me where I'm going, right? So all of my pitfalls, every mistake I've made up until this point in my life, when I arrive there, they have no knowledge of that. So whoever the hell I show up as is who I will be. And so I made a commitment, either in the airport or on the flight, that I was going to try to do the best I could while in the Army. And it was I knew I was not going to stay in for a career. It was a stepping stone to become a cop. So anyway, got down there. So I did okay. They put out a deal. I went in as an E-nothing. And they had a deal in basic and AIT. If you passed all of these different things, then you would graduate from advanced individual training, AIT, as an E3. And I thought, well, more money's always good. Not to mention, if I can be successful in this program, that is also a conduit to other things. So I got that done. Anyway, whatever. The first unit I was in was not great. I went to Germany after 2 years, and the border was still up between East and West Germany and Czechoslovakia, and the whole Cold War was going on, all that kind of crap. And I remember there was a big difference in how that unit I went to was operating day to day. Right, they had a real world mission of border security, border patrol, first line of defense against the Russians attacking and all that kind of crap. And those dudes, you could just sense it. Right, it was an instant thing. And I also was fortunate to work with guys that gave a shit. And so early on, they kind of just forced me to be as good as I could be in the NCO role as a sergeant, as a corporal, and then a sergeant. Anyway, so I think that kind of molded me. Come to Fort Lewis. This is right after the first Iraq War. And I remember the first sergeant showed up I re-enlisted because my wife of now 35 years was pregnant at the time. And I knew I couldn't get out of the Army in Germany. Need a job, need medical, all that kind of jazz. So I re-enlisted, and I got to pick Fort Lewis, so we got to come back home. But right after the first Iraq War, the first sergeant came out and he said, "Hey, man, the Army's trying to now attrit the force." They kept everybody in that was going to that was eligible to get out for this big fight with Iraq. But he came out and he said, "The war's over, and now we got to cut some people down. And so if you want to resign from the Army, they have a program now, and if you let us know, you'll be out in 2 weeks." And so I was like, "Well, hell." So I started testing. Got a job offer. I started with Milton PD down in Pierce County. On a Sunday, it was my chief's meeting. I went into PT the next morning, showed up early, told the first sergeant, "Hey, I went out. I'm going to be a cop. I'm giving you my 2-week notice." And I thought he was going to say, "Well, that program's over," or I was just bullshitting because the Army never does anything efficiently. But he said, "Come back tomorrow and I'll have your paperwork for you." And I'll be damned. I showed up the next day and out processed. I was out processed in 8 days. And went to work for Milton. I think I was there 4 days, started the academy, and it was really good for me, man. The chief at the time at Milton, it's a small agency, still is, not much action going on, but it was a great place for me to start. Kind of like you, I was a dumbass. I had no idea what the actual job
I was not
was.
Dumbass. Okay.
I said I was. I meant kind of like not
you.
knowing much about the job.
I didn't have street smarts, so that's definitely where I was dumb.
Yeah, me too. It was the exact same thing. So I sometimes, as an FTO and then in the training unit and watching new guys come in, and I'm sure it's still happening today. Some guys just don't make it, right? They cannot respond the way that the agency that you work for and that I used to work for wanted them to respond. And sometimes I wonder if I had got thrown into that frying pan without the precursor of the smaller agency, you wonder, would I have been successful still? Because by the time it was a year and a half, almost 2 years until I moved up to camp. And by then I knew how to do a traffic stop. I had gone to a couple of DVs. I had some stuff, you know what I mean? Versus the first day at Kent PD, I'm getting checked in, and my FTO, Doug Glaze, you remember Doug? Yeah, Doug was my FTO. And so I go sit in briefing, and he's taking me, remember, everything was paper reports. Were you around then?
FA cards and stuff like that.
You had a briefcase that was full of papers, right? And so everything was handwritten in the whole bit. And so he's telling me, you're going to need like 80 of these, and you need like 2 of these forms, and we're getting all that together. And then code 3 comes out at Kent Valley Motel, right? I mean, this is 20 minutes into my first shift.
Mm.
And he's like, let's go. And, he let me drive for whatever reason, but he's like, left here, then, got me there. And now we're into this big Donnybrook at Kent Valley Motel. I got part of an IA as a result of that use of force. It was not sustained, by the way.
Which
But
by then took quite a bit.
yeah. I mean, I remember just thinking, holy crap, man, what if this had been the first place? And,
Yeah.
sometimes you wonder, right? I mean, I in my back of my head, guys that were struggling, I would sometimes think, if we just gave them, maybe if we just put them in civilian clothes and let them ride for 3 months and just let them see, you know what I mean?
Mm.
Maybe they could come back and recover. And of course, that's not always the case. I don't know. I always felt kind of like, was there more that we could have done every time a dude, didn't make it or got terminated as a result of FTO? And I know that's just me thinking that everybody can do the job, but there's some people that can't.
Yeah, I appreciate the point though, because I think we need to think critically about this. Like in policing, we have the highest attrition ever, and so we're constantly talking about recruiting and retaining, and we go through all this effort to find someone that's not a liar, not a scoundrel in so many ways through background. They have the right desire and generally the right attitude. We don't remove a lot of people based on attitude, and it's just aptitude, right? And some people, it takes them a lot longer. And so, back in when I started, we had extensions, and so now, we're a lot more open to longer extensions if the criteria is right. But like one of my current bosses and one of your officers back then points out, it takes 4 years for a mechanic or a plumber to be proficient before you really want them messing with your car or your house. However, we have officers like half year in classrooms, and then in the street for a little bit less than that, and you just want them to figure it all out. I mean, we have to look at things differently if we're going to survive. And we really need to mentor, right? And so maybe it takes slowing stuff down, but there's definitely a lot of officers that we all know that maybe they didn't make it at a high pace agency, and then they went somewhere smaller, and then they kept building up, right? They either stayed there and grew and promoted, or they went to a slightly bigger agency or a big agency. So I think it's a fair point.
Yeah. It's there's no, it is a tough one, man. As an FTO, and then having some direction and input to what the FTOs were doing when I was the training sergeant. The guys that frustrated me the most as FTOs were the guys that were just looking to put marks on it, dude. You know what I mean? And it would always frustrate me. What are you doing then, dude? What, you know what I mean? And try to put the ball back in their court. And I think to some degree too, on the retention side of the house, there definitely have been some FDOs that like to gossip about a guy when he does a dumb thing. And I always bring up to him, you've never done something dumb? God knows we've all done all kinds of dumb shit.
We all got stories. Yeah,
man. And so it really sucked to label a guy over this one thing. And now he has that stigma that he can't get out from underneath because you decide it would be cool to go around and talk shit on a guy. And that always frustrated the hell out of me. And every time I caught it, I would definitely be having conversations with dudes. But, some people are just that, man.
Yeah, I think it's really speaks to the integrity of an FTO program. I think what you're talking about, putting negative marks on someone, is you're basically standing by and just watching silently until someone messes up, and then you're jotting it down, right? You're keeping paper, and they're more, I coined, maybe someone else has coined, but it's mine now. It's field evaluating officers rather than field training officers. Like, are you actually teaching and coaching? And so I've had those conversations, and I mean, every agency is going to need to really prove that if they're going to have all these people succeed, because it's a hard job. It's a lot involved.
Dude, it's a ton, right? I mean, your 4-year thing, I've heard that before with law enforcement, right? It's 3 years for most people until you feel, hey, man, I can handle almost anything at this point, right? And obviously certain scenarios and situations are going to be a little bit different, but you have that background to be able to pull from and still come up with a decent solution. And I'm sure you can remember now. I mean, I was an FTO at 3 years thinking I knew the world. And in hindsight, I should never have been an FTO with only 3 years on. You know what I mean? But no one else.
Now it's common. Yeah. It's like, I mean, it's the way you got to do what you got to do. You got people in these high stakes, high liability, high pressure positions, whether it's supervising in 4 or 5 years or K9 and SWAT in 2 to 4 years.
Right.
That is the new way. Because we're so young, and so we gotta do something different to make sure that we're not just throwing people out to the wolves.
It's challenging for sure.
Yeah, or two guys on probation, running the West Hill. I mean, you're asking for trouble, right?
I think so.
Yeah, I know what that looks like firsthand.
Yeah, me too.
Um, yeah, so I mean, FTO training officer, you promote, you hit the street, you come back as a training sergeant, and then you're consummate range instructor. So all this training. What are the things that you found were the biggest things that you wanted to impress upon new officers?
So I think when I was up there, went up as the training officer in the unit. One of the things that frustrated me was I had at that point. I mean, physical fitness was kind of a thing in my life period. I had been an athlete. I'd grown up as a young man. Obviously, the military was trying to keep me fit. Become a copper, and it was interesting. We talked about that. Went to work for the first agency. So I went to work there, and of course, life gets in the way. And I'm I'm going to the academy. I mean, I got FTO. I have 2 young kids at that time. I mean, it's just a lot of stuff pulling me in different directions. So I remember not doing a whole bunch of PT. And so when I took the test at Milton, I was still active duty. My wife had my second son, who at like 12:30 at night, the night before the PT test. Right, she wakes me up, hey, my water broke. So we go to the hospital, end up being there all night long. She's knocked out. I remember the doc coming in. He said, hey, man, if you want to go catch a shower or something, she's going to be out for a little bit, whatever. And so I went and I said, well, I'm going to go take this PT test. That's the next step to get hired. And so I ran that 1.5 miles in 9 minutes and 18 seconds. Remember, I was young then and active duty and all that kind of crap. So then I had this long break between testing for the Kent PD. And I remember I passed, but I ran that 1.5 miles in 12 minutes and 45 seconds. And I remember leaving that test going, what in the hell has happened? Because I felt good. You know what I mean? I still felt like I was fit, but I
can't even wrap my head around that time for you.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. And so, I remember leaving there going, this is not anything that I can not do. You know what I mean? I need to make time some way, shape, or form to make this happen. And so at that time, my wife was working part-time. I was on graveyard once I got hired at Kent. And so I bought a treadmill so the kids could play Legos and I could get on the treadmill and do his thing. I remember working an off-duty job at the grocery store at QFC. Did you get hired when we were still doing that crap at the QFC?
Not QFC, but like HD Hotspurs and all that.
Other places, right? Yeah. So QFC was, about the boringest damn thing ever, right? But they had, you stand at one set of open doors, which is right near the magazine rack. So, and this is graveyard hours. You know what I mean? There's nobody coming in here to shop other than criminals, right? Pass bad checks and that kind of thing. So I remember reading an article, and I don't remember the dude's name or any of that kind of bull crap, but they were talking about this dude who's premier brain surgeon on the planet and all this shit. And every day he took an hour to play racquetball. And they're like, what the hell? Some of your brain surgeries are lasting 23, 25 hours. And right after that, you go play racquetball. And he said, my patients deserve that from me because he talked about, early onset of Alzheimer's, blood flow, plenty of studies that have shown, people that are more physically fit manage stress and sleep deprivation and all this crap better than people that are out of shape. And that hit me as well, thinking, man, this is a job that is full of all of that crap. And so no matter what, I have to stay in good physical condition for not just myself, but my family, my partners, and the community that I've taken an oath to try to protect. And I know that sounds corny to some folks. And if it sounds corny to you, then you're probably not the kind of guy that I would hang out with. But at any rate.
For sure. Yeah.
So as a training officer, I remember guys coming in and, we'd have people fail the PT test when they went to the academy. I'm like, how the hell is that happening? Right. You took the test to even get hired. What the hell changed in 3 months that now you can't pass it? And of course the answer was they were passing the run or the push-ups by 1 second or
barely, right? Squeaking by. And then they let it go.
Squeaking. And so there was not much I can do to change that, right? I don't have an influence over those people until we got them. But I remember talking to the command staff at the time that, I get that we ain't allowed to PT on duty at that time. I said, but I need to PT on duty and I need to be able to PT these guys. So I got to maintain my own physical fitness. And I want to impress upon these people that this is for your life, man. This is not just to pass a test and you don't do it ever again. And so I don't know if you were ever part of any of those runs where we would, as we were cooling down walking, I would try to talk to people and just say, hey, man, you passed a test. If nothing else, maintain that bare minimum for the rest of your career because it's so vitally important for your mental health, for your physical health, obviously. And then post-retirement, the objective is to get to retirement so you can enjoy your benefits. You know what I mean? And how many dudes, I used to rattle them off, names of people that retired within 6 months, they were dead, which is common in law enforcement, not just our agency.
Super common.
And so, you're working hard, enjoy the fruits of your labor. So I think the physical fitness piece was something I tried to emulate to others, but I was also just constantly trying to impress upon the new hires. Hey, man, get that part solid. And once it becomes the habit, I mean, you're a fit dude. I feel crappy when I don't get to work out. You know what I mean?
For sure.
It's just become a habit like everything else. So I think that's a huge thing. That was a thing. I think that, you talked about the background with firearms and all that kind of stuff. And Lord knows I've made plenty of mistakes in my career with investigations and personnel issues and that kind of crap. But most of those were reparable, right? I could come back behind a bad case, write an addendum, and maybe fix it. I could screw up evidence and potentially still get that evidence admitted into court because there was no malice. It was just me, improperly doing it, that type of thing. I mean, you name it. There are very few things that you can't fix in law enforcement if you make an honest mistake. Mm-hmm. But the one thing is the gun. And if on that terrible day, if you don't have the requisite skills to manage the problem that's presented to you, there's no fixing that, right? You will either be a statistic and die in the line of duty, or potentially you're going to miss and have those misses and pass-through rounds go where they shouldn't go and give you a bad outcome. And so for me, that was just one of those things. I think it went along with fitness, that I wanted to have as high a level of skill with guns as I could, because if I ever got put in that position, I wanted to make sure that I could handle the problem.
Yeah.
And so, those two things, and tactics, of course, right? Talking about, how bad tactics puts you into a shooting, right? Good tactics may prevent you from having to be in a shooting or get shot. And so let's really think about how we're managing some of these critical incidents and doing some stuff with it. And so those were the focus for me.
Yeah, I love that. And when you think about it, you can simplify it down to some pretty low-hanging fruit, right? You're not even asking a ton of these recruits and these officers. You're like, hey, maintain this basic standard, and we know it's not hard, right? Most people that aren't even training young people, let's say teenagers, can all pass it, right? Once they get the push-ups up, maybe. But ultimately, it's not hard to maintain. But yeah, we see what that looks like, and we don't need to, I guess, overdo it. But as far as it's obvious that there's a lot of first responders that aren't maintaining their basic need for the bad day. But at the same time, yeah, you talk about tactics, how proper tactics keeps you out of that bad situation. Like certainly some fitness can keep you out of a shoot if you can maintain your gun, or you can maintain your distance or overpower someone. So yeah, man, I love how even back then when you're looking at that magazine, right, a doctor, and that probably ahead of his time, right? It's a lot more common knowledge now, but it's still, we have to move the needle a lot more when you say wellness and health, and what's the PD's role in that or supporting that. And we still have a long way to go. There's still a lot of departments that aren't allowing you to work out on duty, where literally that is what helps you be a proficient, viable, optimal officer, right? To protect someone's life when it comes down to it.
Yeah. So, with the SWAT stuff, right, I was getting specialty pay for that assignment forever. And so at one point I remember saying, we need to get rid of the specialty pay. The pay is what is keeping some guys past their tenure. You know what I mean? They like the paycheck, but they're not interested anymore. And so if we get rid of that piece, would that change? And now guys that, should be leaving the team and know it, or would be getting out of here a little bit quicker. But with that specialty pay, in my head, I always thought that is my PT pay. That is the time, the extra money I'm getting, right? That small stipend each month is compensation for the hours that I'm putting in every week to do it. And I think I would have done, regardless of that, right? As an FTO, I got specialty pay. As later in the career, that if you were a trainer and instructor, you got specialty pay. There's a million things that you're getting additional pay for. But man, I remember played football growing up. And so we were into two-a-day practices. We practiced in the morning, practiced in the evening because it was hot in the summertime, obviously. So in between those practices, we went up to Wild Waves, which was brand new at that time. And met, me and all the dudes on the team up there, and splash around, having a good time, whatever. But I'm at the top of a slide, and there was a pretty good-looking girl working in there, right? Got her little Wild Wave suit on and stuff. And one of my friends said, hey, I noticed everybody here, all the girls wear the one piece and the guys wear the trunks, but y'all don't have no fat asses in here, right? And I kind of laughed at that. And she said, well, they only they only issue suits to a certain size. So if you can't fit the suit, then you can't have the job.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking, oh, that's what, I guess that's one way to do it. But I always thought as coppers, if
Yeah.
Wild Waves could, and I'm sure they can't today,
Not
you know what I mean?
anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not anymore, but back
Don't
then.
let any of them, the HR hear that now. They're going to shut it down.
Yeah, and it's, you know, man, it's not even really a weight thing. You know what I mean? Which is, I remember a older guy, he's a triathlete, and he's kind of a chunky fella, but he's doing triathlons. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
And he is competitive in his age range and stuff. And so, I think being fit doesn't necessarily mean a six pack. It just means, are you capable of doing the job? You know, and like so, I've said this a million times. PT is for my brain more than my body, right? That is it the mental escape. I mean, when I go for a run to this day, it's, you know, it's more about the mental part, not necessarily that I'm trying to get anything out of the run, other than I just let my brain work and get some blood flow up there, man. There's enough research out there now where it's dumbfounding to me that people neglect that part of their personal health, man.
Yeah. And for those that this sounds intimidating, whether you're a cop or not, or you're a new cop, like I was not, you know, I ran in high school, but it's just to get out of doing PE. Right. So I was not into athletics, and I was not into weight training, but now it's become a very, very foundational part of my life. And I would attribute it largely to how I've been able to manage some really significant stress at different times in my career, some physical danger, and you know what, some people, it's definitely they would imagine that I could have had some really significant post traumatic stress response, and I'm not saying I didn't, but I look back at my career and how I'm navigating life, and I feel really good about all of it, and I think that fitness was a huge benefit to that. So when you talk about, man, standards or I wrote down standards, but what I'm thinking about is what you're talking about with regards to people not wanting to step out of SWAT. So that I'm imagining the SWAT of yesteryear, where people are staying on the team for the specialty pay. The culture that I observed from the outside, or alongside when I was in K9 and got to hang out with you guys, was no one was on there that had no business being there, and it was a sense of pride. And I know that the standards for Kent were really high. Is that something that you had to, or you took part in changing that model, right? Where, hey, our standards are really high, and I know several people at certain points said, hey, I'm getting a little old for this, or hey, I'm just not as sharp as I used to be. It's someone else's turn. And so I feel like a lot of people kind of self-exited, at least from my purview. Is that your experience, or what did you do to kind of help shape that?
So if you were so early on, we were a standalone SWAT team, right? And SWAT was definitely one of the things I was looking for the second agency. You know, is there enough specialty assignments and other things to keep me gainfully not just employed but engaged for a career? And so we had a standalone team. I come to the agency. I think I was there for maybe a year. And I don't actually, I know they counted my previous time at Milton at that time you had to have 3 years to test. And so I had to get a waiver to take the test, and then but I was told that I would not be eligible until I hit the 3 year mark. So it was like the test was going to be 2 months prior to me hitting 3 years or some damn thing. So I take the test, do well on it, and then the team actually expanded by one spot 2 months after I took the test. And I don't know if that was just to help me get on the team or what the hell the deal was, but I got on the team pretty early in my career. At that time, I mean, there was very few call outs were occurring, right? Our op tempo was pretty damn low. We were training 1 day a month. There was certainly some guys, I think, at that point that were just there for the specialty pay. I think I was on the team for 5 years, maybe, before the Valley SWAT team, the regional concept, started getting brought up and all that kind of jazz. And it was interesting timing, and like a lot of stuff. If this hadn't happened, what would my life have been like, type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember talking to Johnny P. I don't know if you want me to drop names.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
So I talked to him, and I was like, man, this is not the SWAT career I wanted, right? I wanted to be about that life, and I wanted dudes that gave a shit, and I wanted to be surrounded by people that, wanted to do well at this thing. And there's a ton of roadblocks in the way. Op tempo isn't just one of them, but also the training that we were getting at the time was very low, as well as not very good. Shit like show up on the day and okay, who's got a scenario we can run? I was like, what in the hell? You mean it's completely different than what my military training had been, where everything was planned to the nth degree. And so I remember telling him, I said, hey man, this was like October or November of whatever the hell year it was. But I said, hey man, if this regional team thing doesn't come to fruition effective January 1, like we're hearing the rumor mill chain, I am resigning.
Mm.
I'm just done. I don't want to do this anymore. And this is not what I was wanting it to be. Luckily, we did become a regional team that following January. And I think a big thing was that they put out that there would be a full-time team training coordinator that would answer directly to the SWAT commander. And so I thought, well, I was in PROAC at that time, Street Crimes Unit, for guys that don't know what the heck PROAC is.
What does proactive mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was in that unit. I thought, I'm putting in for that job, right? I mean, I think I was a firearms instructor already, and I think I'd done some active shooter training for the agency, but it was all in-house stuff. And I thought, I'm going to put in for that job and see what it's about. So I got selected, I think partially because we were the biggest agency on the regional team, and Chief Crawford had the body to spare and nobody else did, was partly why I got selected. But I remember the SWAT commander at the time was from a different agency, meeting up with him, and he said, hey, I need you to write a bunch of policies up and different things. That's probably what your job is, of course, coordinating, finding locations and keeping records and all that kind of shit. And I was like, okay, I'm up for that task type of thing. And I think that so I would go to the team leader meetings. I wasn't a team leader yet. And I would listen to them all bickering about, we crack the egg on the big end, we crack it on the small end. And, we turn left and, well, hell, we turn right now. How are we going to come together as a solid team? And initially I was asking for a lot of input, so, hey, how do you guys want me to write up this policy or this procedure? And, it just became an argument fest. And so I remember leaving one of those thinking, yeah, man, I'm just going to write the motherfucker the way I want to write it and see what happens. And so I wrote it, kicked it out as a draft, got zero response back, type of thing. And so then it was just adopted. I remember somebody, and I don't remember who told me this, but I was bitching a little bit about why are we did not really become a team for 18 months, right? And we were on paper, but there were so many personalities. It was the joining of 3 active teams at that time, and then Federal Way had their team that came on later.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just a lot of bickering about shit. And somebody said, man, somebody's just got to be team asshole. And I said, well, I guess I'm the man for that job, right? And so I just started, honestly, man, I just imposed my will on that team and said, I want a culture of excellence. I want dudes here that give a shit. There should be no discussion about, well, is the chief going to remove him or not? It should be as simple as, Eric, you are not meeting standards, and the only thing, the resolution of that is for you to resign and get off this team. And if we've selected the right guy, then Eric nods his head and says, you are correct, I'm out, or you are right, I have been fucking up, and I'm going to change that behavior, and you'll notice it immediately, type of thing, and see what happens. And so I think pushing that envelope of stuff helped a lot. I mean, this wasn't me just being a solo cowboy out there, right? There's a lot of good guys that were involved in that process. But I think probably about the 5-year mark was the point where I quit having to do or be the vocal guy. And I had become a team leader at that point, so I had some juice on the team. With an actual formal leadership position. But I just started watching younger guys coming on the team and dudes that were now assistant team leaders and other stuff, just enforcing that same shit. And I think it's still alive today. And I say it to guys all the time, man, it's not the equipment you have. It's not, you have 14 Bearcats and a huge budget. It's a culture of excellence, right? If you give me some dudes that want to be good at this, they will be good at it, right? Because that's what matters. And I do think that your point is valid. I think there is a sense of pride of being on that team because it's hard to stay on that team. You know what I mean? And so I have said this for a long time to a bunch of dudes when I teach the SWAT team leader class and other things. The lowest common denominator is the biggest morale killer on the planet. People want to be challenged, man. They want to be challenged. So challenge your people. And I almost guarantee you they will rise to that challenge every single time. Now, there's going to be a breaking point that you kind of have to figure out, where based on the time that we're being given to train and do stuff and the resources that are provided to us to do the job, we may want to be better, but those two things will prohibit us from going past where we currently stand. And so then the next thing is get them more time and resources. That's the next part of your job as a team leader and a leader, period, right? Is if we reach the limits of what we can provide, then maybe it's not the personnel anymore. Maybe it's the agency's requirement now to increase the resources and time to get better at it. So kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah. What I heard is you had to stand up. Someone needed a figurehead, right? Someone
Yeah.
needed to be vocal. Someone needed to be the example. Fall in line, follow along. You didn't do it alone, right? You had allies in there to help support that culture. Uh, and then it sounds like you had to be patient, right? You kind of, if I heard right, remember right, you said 5 years in. That's where it was basically, you could kind of you could kind of ease off, right? Ease off the gas, and it was kind of maintaining itself to some
Yeah.
degree.
Yep. Because that was the new culture, right? This is what we do here, kind of thing. And it's again, you go around the country now and teaching the team leader class and doing stuff. Guys are, sometimes they're very impressed, or I don't know what the right word is. They're surprised at what our team was capable of doing, right? What we had as far as capabilities go. And I always remind them, hey, dudes, you don't go back to your agency tomorrow and tell the chief, you need all of this equipment and all this training time and all this shit that my team had, because remember, this was a 23-year process, start to finish. You know what I mean? And I remember retiring thinking, I wish I was starting my career today just based on what this team currently is versus what I started out as. You know what I mean? Because it was absolutely a completely different team. Completely.
Yeah. I mean, that's huge leadership. And, leadership is such a focus for me. I like reading about it. I like learning about it. And that's where, everything basically you said, I'm putting in the vein of leadership. And maybe that would bring me to another question. I remember, I came from an academic background. That's what I was good at. I was good at hitting the books. I was good at taking tests. I was not street smart. Yeah. I know. that's the one thing I was able to do for my family and for honor and respect. And then I became a cop, and then it all dissolved away. But not good at the math. But I remember you said or you wrote, or at some point you impressed, leaders are readers. And I think it wasn't a surprise for me to hear that by then. Even from me meeting you, I was like, man, an ex-military training cop is not a mental slouch. You were so sharp, so quick-witted, right? Everything about you, I could tell your brain was firing quick, and that was what was really impressive to me, especially being someone that mulls things over. I let things marinate and I kind of process things. But when you talked about reading, I think that's something that cops really need to hear, right? We focus on the things we can see. A lot of us are tactile. That's what draws us in. So just to slow things down, thoughts on that, or anything you want to add to those listening in?
Man, so and I say that quote all the time. Our leaders are readers, and I did steal that from somebody. I didn't make that up, and I don't know who actually came up with that quote, but
it's yours.
When I heard it, just like you, it kind of impressed upon me, man. That is absolutely right. And at the time, I'm still in this cycle right now. I enjoy reading, always have, type of thing. So I read some type of fiction, and then nonfiction, nonfiction. I go through that cycle. And I remember hearing that quote and thinking to myself, okay, I am reading, but am I reading the right stuff? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so, I'm good. As an example, right? A nonfiction book about, the D-Day landing or something like that, or, some historical military thing. And I would read that because I was interested in how, just how do you make that happen? And, that kind of crap. But I remember thinking about the time that what I remembered from those books wasn't necessarily the thing I picked the book up for. And it's kind of like what you just did with my last statement when I was blabbing away about stuff. And you're like, well, here's what I heard. Right. And you mentioned some stuff. And in those books, what I recalled was the examples of leadership that were outstanding. You know what I mean? And so it became a focus at that point in my life. And I started reading a ton about leadership, and also asking other dudes, what books have you read, kind of a thing. And what would you recommend? And it was really just, I don't know if I can't say I was intentionally trying to hone my leadership skills, other than, I wanted to be a good leader. I was hoping that was, what I was to people, type of thing. But it absolutely benefited me across the board. Not only could I identify people that were not good leaders, and maybe I shouldn't give as much credence to their words as I should, based on what I was learning and figuring out, but also caught me a bunch of times, potentially trying to prevented me from being a hypocrite. You know what I mean? Because my behavior wasn't what I want to do. And I mean, like all these, I have regrets, man. I think I could have been a better patrol sergeant than I was. I think I was a pretty good training sergeant. I think I was a pretty good SWAT team leader, but the patrol sergeant side of the house, probably could have done a better job of that. And I think I got promoted late in my career, had been a cop for a while already. Excuse me. Um, so, I guess honing those patrol skills and doing a better job, not just for me, but for my squads would have been something I could have, in hindsight, I wish I would have could go back in time and do a better job of that. Yeah, I think sometimes too with the patrol squads, and I always felt like a heel about it was, okay, I got 30 hours of training this month. How many operations are we going to do this month? Part-time team, of course, we're getting pulled out all the time to do stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, and then outside training events that were not necessarily SWAT related, but other stuff. I mean, I remember going a full month and not reporting to the patrol division one day that entire month, right? Just things were different things were scheduled. And so you'd come back and you'd hear and I think good natured and good hearted guys like, oh, look who's here. And you ain't got no SWAT stuff today and all that kind of shit. But that actually impacted me a little bit. Right. So, I know that had an effect on it, and maybe in my own head, my performance as a patrol sergeant isn't as bad as I think it was. It felt like it because I was gone a lot with the other assignment. So man, it's interesting. A couple of times in my career, people that assumed shit about me, and then when they actually took the time to know me, they figured out that their assumptions were incorrect, and
Mm-hmm.
mainly from leaders higher up in the chain of command. You know what I mean? It was like, oh, I didn't even think you'd be interested in this, and why wouldn't I be interested in this? You know what I mean? What led you down that road, type of thing? And I don't know if it's the cursing or I would say I left you with some kind of impression that I was a dickhead to talk to or something. Maybe it's just something in my personality, but it
No,
was
I was
always,
just scared. It doesn't mean I didn't respect you. I was just scared. I thought I was going to lose my job.
yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure that, are you guys still doing like leadership seminars and sergeant time and all that kind of horse shit, or has that kind of gone the way of the
I mean,
dodo?
we like go to meetings and stuff.
All right. I mean, so there
Yeah,
was a point where
we have conversations. We have some external speakers sometimes, but I think that it's, and I think as I'm listening to what you're saying, and I find that you've been such a strong regional leader, even not even working directly with you, right? Just working in tandem or alongside, getting these little peaks and such. But I think it's like anything, maybe not like anything, but with leadership, and this might go zigzag a little bit, but with leadership, I think you sound like a huge D bag if you're like, I study leadership and I want to be a great leader. It sounds so like, like you assume this ego, you assume all these things, but truly the good leaders are the ones that don't focus on the word leadership, right? They focus on being excellent. They focus on helping their team be excellent, right? They help people, right? So if you can move things, if you can move the needle, if you can advance the mission with people, that's what leadership is, right? So it's less about being a leader, it's about getting the thing done, but leadership is the byproduct, right? So if you find an effective way to do that and communicate with people and engage the team, then you're there. And I think that that's where you've been so impactful. As a sergeant, rank matters, and you found a way to get a lot of things moving at a not high rank, right? Like let's be real. Like I'm a sergeant. It's not.
yeah.
There's no real power, right? The more you get a lot more with your influence and your relationships than you do with your 3 stripes. And shout out to Johnny P, right? The only person I've ever heard of that took a voluntary double demotion to finish his career as a sergeant, where he felt most connected to his purpose and the guys. I mean, that's unreal. That's
It
unreal.
is
But
unreal.
yeah,
I always wondered if there was a backstory, but he never did. He would never give it up, man.
yeah. I the version I picked up and was you're working a desk, and that at a certain point you've been working a desk for a while as a commander, as a captain, or whatever we had back then, and you just don't feel like a cop. And he had a limited time left with his planning and retirement and things he wanted to do and his goals, and he just said, "Hey, I can make it work." And I think that was his soul speaking. Maybe we'll have him on here to ask him personally, but
That dude was a big mentor to me, man.
mm-hmm,
He was a big mentor to me on a lot of stuff, and a lot of conversations, not just professionally but personally, where he was an impactful guy in my life. I think highly of him as a leader and as a human, man.
yeah,
Some of
he
my
had
favorite
a
quotes is those who seek leadership the most are seldom suited for it, and I've always kind of kept that in the back of my head.
yeah. I think that's a great way to sum up basically what I'm trying to say is like, and this is not to elevate myself, but you know me, like I was a shy, I'm a more reserved guy until you get to know me, and so all this stuff, the podcast and recruiting stuff, it really just came as, hey, I think I can do it, and I think I'm the guy, not necessarily like I want to be the guy.
Right.
But yeah, it's just getting more comfortable with reps and just kind of forcing that forcing that challenge, I suppose.
Yeah, man, which is always a good thing, right? I mean, having challenges in your life are a self-imposed challenges, not inadvertent challenges. But I think those are the things that keep you mentally in the game and keep you engaged and do a bunch of stuff. You know what I mean? It's I mean, my career right now, right, teaching on a national level and traveling around, I would have never thought I was going to do this, and it was not even something that I've sought out. You know what I mean? It just for whatever reason, training and teaching was something I felt very comfortable with early on, the type of thing. I kind of felt like I could do a good job with it, and you know, it just kind of morphed into this career that I'm into right now. But I mean, if you had asked me, hell, you know, 10, 15 years ago, would I be on a national level going around teaching cops all over the country and citizens now on the shooting side?
Mm-hmm.
I said, hell no, that's A, I don't even think that's something I want to do, but B, I don't think I would ever have the experience necessary to go do that. But, you know, it has worked out. I think that, so I retired on my last day at work was a Friday, and the following Monday I was teaching a team leader class. And so I think that the connection to law enforcement has also kept me motivated. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
mean, I've seen a bunch of SWAT guys and doing shit all the time with them. And so maybe, you know, if I didn't have this, if I had retired and then, you know, went to work at the post office or Walmart or some damn thing, maybe I wouldn't be, you know, so concerned about PT anymore and that kind of stuff. So I don't know. It's just it's weird what life throws at you and how things end up shaping themselves up, man.
Maybe, or you'd be the buffest, fittest Walmart greeter, just doing air squats and like,
Maybe
you know, shoulder pressing carts as people come in.
could be it. There. So yeah, I mean, circling back, the PT, I think huge, and I think there were other things, man, that I tried to implement that didn't go anywhere. That I thought were also valuable. We get close to being done.
I mean, I want to keep asking you stuff, but I also want to be mindful of your time.
I'm good. I don't
Okay.
care. So our mutual, a guy that was almost at 20 and then had a genetic malady hit him and he was forced to retire. They actually did him right and let him, you know, put him in a
Mm-hmm.
job where he could stay in there, even though he was not technically fit for duty type of thing by the doctor. But I have many conversations with that guy leading up to it. And one of the things that he was very adept at was financial planning. And that was a big thing in his life that even if, you know, the condition he had, if he had been forced to resign immediately, he was going to be okay because he had done a great job
Mm.
up until then. And I remember thinking, you know, why is that? And Gordon Graham and other shit, right? Going to those seminars, but Gordon saying, you know, firemen do a much better job with finances than coppers.
Yeah.
And his big reasoning is that is because they sit in the firehouse all day as a group. And now I hear Eric talking about, well, hey, my, you know, credit union has CD at 4.75 right now. Oh, well, shit, I didn't know that. And so I can
Yeah.
jump on that bit of info versus cops who are in the car alone all damn day long. And we really don't see each other except for at briefing, if you even have briefing anymore. And so some of that ability to share that knowledge is lost on the police side of the house versus the fire side. And I mean, tried forever to try to get financial planners to come in and more than just our, you know, the deferred comp and that kind of thing. I mean, actual dudes that could talk to you about a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because that also opens doors for you, right? Now I mean, we have seen coppers stay as coppers well past the time that they should be working the road or even working in the capacity, but their financial planning sucked and they can't do anything else. Does that make sense? So they're kind of
Yeah,
trapped.
for sure.
So I think that would be a thing too that, you know, the leaders are readers again, man, read up on that shit a little bit or talk to the guys that, you know, are adept at it and start early, man.
Yeah,
Start
I like
early.
to think that's getting better, right? Like we recognize it's a component of wellness, and you know, I've had a financial coach on here, which is I think, and I've seen them appear more at wellness. You know, seminars are just kind of cop resilience seminars, right? So it's a piece of it, and I think that as the culture has shifted, as I've seen, right, you have more time where cops are together. You know, they're going to calls together. You know, because you have multiple options and de-escalation. That's great, and then you can all go back to the sub together to type. That might be an opportunity for that. So,
Right.
yeah, I appreciate that insight for sure. I'm wondering, you know, kind of going back a little bit with being able to change things, like what helped you the most? And for those listening, there's a lot of things that police need and a lot of things the culture needs and a lot of things that public trust need. And for those emerging leaders, like what advice would you give to them as they sometimes have to win over their bosses?
um, I don't know. We joke all the time, right? Oh, you got promoted to sergeant. Did you get your lobotomy yet? Right? No, you
Mm-hmm.
got promoted to commander. Did you get your lobotomy yet? And all the way on up the
Mm-hmm.
line. And I think that as the responsibility changes, some of that is going to naturally occur, right? I mean, I have a different
Yeah.
focus as a sergeant than I did as a patrol officer working
Yeah.
this my little section of the city. Um, but sometimes I wonder, man, if dudes lose sight of what that promotion was supposed to be for. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you're supposed to get promoted because you were competent, obviously, would be a thing, but also to try to make life better for your subordinates, man. And some, this is going to be a SWAT example, but you can apply this however you want to.
For
Uh,
sure.
as we get into barricades and stuff like that, right, we end up with a normal barricade progression of things that the team is going to do. So we arrive on scene, and I'm talking about, patrol has a robbery suspect in the apartment type of crap, right? So this is not a pre-planned event. We're just showing up. So team shows up, and we're going to start our process. So the first thing is let's get an arrest team out there in case the guy wants to surrender. And then we're going to relieve the patrol containment and replace that with our own containment. And then we're waiting on a warrant, and we finally got the warrant. And we've been hailing and trying to call and do all that bullshit up until we're waiting on the warrant. So we got the warrant. So then we're going to chuck some flashbangs around potentially outside, create a racket, and let the guy know we ain't kidding around now, fella, right? It's time to give it up. And then,
Mm-hmm.
we might explosive breach a door and then stuff in a robot and then go to chemicals and, all these different steps that we're taking. And what I found myself doing inadvertently was I know what the next step is. Does that make sense? I know enough time has
Yeah.
transpired for the next step to occur. But what I found myself doing was on the radio, I would say, if I was the dude in charge at that point, I could request permission to chuck DDs around the yard. Go ahead. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
boom, boom, boom. Okay, that didn't work. Request permission to put a bomb on the door. Go ahead, right? Type of thing. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember thinking one day, why am I asking for permission to do what I already know they're going to say yes to? And
Sure.
then the second piece of that is, what is the commander's intent, right? I don't need anybody's permission to do my job, right? I mean, there's an implied thing there. And particularly as a patrol officer, I mean, can you imagine a patrol officer calling you in and saying, hey, Sarge, I'd like to OC this guy now, and here's why, and
We're
explaining it to
moving
you.
that direction. We're moving that direction.
Well, that's
Some may argue in some places.
all right. So as it sits right now, Patrol Sergeant Tongue, if I was new recruit Blowers and I could switch to admin, hey,
Yeah.
this guy has his fists up and he says he's going to beat me up and I'd like to squirt some OC on him. Is that okay? Would you lose? Would you be like, what the hell are you
Oh my.
talking about?
Of course. Of course.
Right. And so,
Switch
I,
back and handle it. I'll be en route. Yeah.
right. Yeah. And so kind of did the same thing. Rather than asking permission, I would do it and then tell them what I did. Does that make sense? Because the CP obviously
Mm-hmm.
still needs to know what's going on, type of thing. And no one batted an eye on it because it was obvious. You know what I mean? So on the patrol sergeant side of the house, there were things that I did where I have heard other sergeants would either tell me or I would hear them go ask for permission to do the thing. And I would
Mm-hmm.
always, not always, but in some cases, I'd be like, why did you ask to do that? Or why did you ask whether or not you were authorized to do that thing when you already know the answer? And the answer is, I'm trying to put that liability on somebody else, man. So be accountable, dude. Be accountable for
Mm-hmm.
your own actions, right? And understand what your primary role is, and that is taking care of the officers under your supervision, man. Whatever that may be, right? My wife was, a long time in fine dining and shit, and I remember asking her, what's the important things to an employee? What's the big shit? And she said, don't fuck up their pay and don't fuck up their vacation requests. Those are priorities that you must handle immediately, right? And I kind of took that to heart. And it was really one of the only things that would make me go to my desk, absent at the beginning of the shift and at the end, right? It would be like, hey, Sarge, get an NDC message, hey, I put in a vacation request. Copy that, stand by. And I'd go down there and try to get that handled. Um, and that's a very base thing, but again, apply it to whatever you want to, right? And however you want to do it. But I always operate under the auspice. I don't need anybody's permission to do my job, man.
Yeah. I
If I
think
get,
with that comes trust, right? Is
yeah,
confidence, the intelligence and the training, and so your leaders start trusting you, right? You know what you're
yeah,
talking about, and then you trust yourself, right? So the ownership piece is huge, and I know I was a new sergeant that was calling saying, "Hey, what should I do?" To command the duty officer, and I appreciated leaders that were saying, "Hey, Tongue, what do you want to do?" And I'd say, well, I want to do 1, 2, 3. He's like, sounds good. Let's go. Like, do it. And that was validating, right? So then the tip that I would give to new emerging leaders or officers when your sergeant hits you up, or you want to hit up your sergeant to loop in and just confirm, say, hey, I got this. This is what I want to do. I mean, that carries so much better than a lot of times you do have someone that wants a sergeant hopeful or whatnot, and they're not making the decision. Even when you say, hey, what do you want to do? They're like, well, I don't know. And they kind of play it all back again. You're like, okay, we got some development to do for yourself, right? You're either not competent, confident with the knowledge, or it's just a gut thing. Regardless, like there's something to be done.
Yeah. I agree 100%. I also think, man, sometimes dudes forget that everything you do, it's not the sergeant doesn't set the example. He is the example. And so everything you do is being looked at, right? And so if it's okay for Sergeant Tongue, then it must be okay for me too. And I think you got to be aware of that. And that includes in your personal life, right? I know I have pissed off some fellas before, but I guess, I'm catting around with my wife and I'm going out and, looking for booty and all this stuff. And he's a married man. And I would ask guys, is your wife, is this open marriage? You guys, your wife cool with this? Oh, hell no, dude, type of shit. Right. And I never think to myself, so I just asked you, if we get shot at and I am shot, will you come and rescue me? Will you come to my aid? And you said, yes. So how the fuck am I supposed to believe that when the person who's supposed to trust you more than anybody in their life can't trust your ass and you're bragging about it? So are you bullshitting me the same way you bullshit your wife? Or, what's that about type of thing? Well, that's completely different. Oh, okay. Maybe it is. Right. And that's, I've certainly met dudes that were, not good husbands and they were perfectly okay in those scenarios. But sometimes I think we forget that everything you're doing may have an impact on one of your subordinates, even though some of them may not give a shit. You may be having one guy look at you and say that you ain't worth a shit, dude, for whatever reason. That's just one example.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate you bringing that up. A couple of reasons. One, and I thought about asking you earlier because I just a recent recording was with a therapist, and she was talking about infidelity being so high in law enforcement and reasons why, contributed things and things we can work on, right? So with that, when I think about my role models, one of them, you're always posting about your wife. You're clearly very attracted to her, and what you say very complimentary. And I was like, truly, I respect the heck out of someone that can get through this career and maintain a healthy, happy relationship and marriage, right? So that's what I want for myself. And so I try to pay attention to those that are navigating the career well, and they're going strong, right, into retirement and whatnot. So it is something I want to ask you, and since you brought that up, that there's so many things that we can be aware of as far as, as it pertains to all things health and a healthy career. But bringing up relationship, what are your tips on that?
So, and again, regrets with everything, right? From SWAT operations to personnel management to you name it, across the board, I do not believe I've been perfect in any way, shape, or form. Lots of regrets and things I wish I could go back and do slightly different and maybe get a different outcome, right? One of the things with the job, for me, it was a very, very addicting career. And so I found myself early in the career wanting that jazz, right? And on vacation, I'm wondering, is the squad getting into some shit right now, right? And, all that kind of jazz. And then what I attributed my overzealousness to was what's monetary, right? I need to make more money for the family and that kind of crap. And obviously that did play out. But the reality is I was feeding my own addiction to try to get into some shit, right? I wanted to be in all the pursuits and in all the critical incidents and all the stuff. And so I know that had an impact. Luckily for me, my wife is not a Wilton Lily. She will definitely let me know if I'm screwing up. And I remember her talking to me about it. And I kept going like, well, we need the money for this and we need the money for that. And she finally said, I don't give a shit about the money. Right. I don't give a shit about the money. We need you here for a lot of stuff. And so we came to an agreement at that point that I will only work X number of hours of overtime, or at least sign up for X number of overtime. How the job goes. Sometimes you go over that. But there were certainly times that I would bypass, overtime opportunities to make sure that I had enough time at home to do shit with my wife and the kids, man. I think that was important. A regret. My wife is I don't know how you put it. My wife would love it if every time you told somebody they were under arrest that they said, yes, sir, and turned around, put their hand behind their back, and you just cuffed them and everything too tight. Nope, there was a fine. Sit in the car, watch your head. Do you want AC or heat? Do you want country or rap? right? And we're
Yeah.
all just everybody gets along real good. And so some of the shit like with
Sounds great. Sounds
yeah,
great.
sounds fantastic, right? It's great. And better than that, just no crime at all, right? Wouldn't that be fantastic? Decrime yourself right out of a job, Eric. But anyway, um, there were things that bothered me that I didn't bring up to my wife because I knew it would bother her as well. Does that make sense? And
Yeah,
I don't know if that's just, my era of when I grew up and just wanting to protect my wife from that kind of exposure to especially stuff with little kids and neglect and
for
that type of
sure.
shit.
Yeah.
In hindsight, I really wish I would have kept her in the loop, right? And she may not have wanted to hear those stories, but I think I needed her to hear them so that I could talk about them. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
And
for sure.
there's incidents that have occurred. I mean, at the time they occur, the job still needs to get done, right? You got to keep your nose to the grindstone. You keep on trucking along and all that shit. And I think sometimes, man, which I much better job with this stuff than my early years. Just talking about how an incident may have affected you. I wish I would have been more proactive in going to people and talking about those times when just there was things that bothered me. And I remember it was Ox the Rottweiler. Was he working? And when you got hired,
No.
it was a track, and I'm standing in the right outside the row of some bushes, and unbeknownst to me, the crook is right there in the weeds, right, but I can't see him. Well, Ox gets way ahead of the handler and hits him, and this is a big Rottweiler, and he's letting this fella have it, and the handler's tied up in brambles and other shit, right, and so dog's just working him, and the look on that dude's face, and the way his eyes rolled in his head, and I could see the fat coming off of his arm. I mean, Ox
Mhm.
was putting some work on him, and that was I'd seen and arrested people that had been bit by canine, but not that personal. Does that make sense? And for
Yeah.
such a long period of time, and to some of your listeners, they think, well, you can whatever you candy ass type of shit, but that is an incident where I should have talked to somebody more about how that look like. Does that make sense? Now you get, of
Yeah,
course, the more
absolutely.
exposures you get, of course you get, internally you get abilities to manage some of that shit on your own and that kind of stuff. But I mean, it could be anything. And I think sometimes we don't, from small to big, if it's bothering you, you need to talk to somebody about it and not feel like you're going to be labeled a sissy or anything else. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Um, the first critical incident debrief that we went to as a team right after one of the team shootouts. And I was thinking, whatever, on this shit. But I remember going there. It was pretty interesting in a lot of cases, or in a lot of regards. And the first was everybody's perception was slightly different, which I thought was interesting that
Yeah.
we all kind of saw it a different way. But also just hearing dudes where they talked about what they did, and then all of us shook our heads like, yeah, that was the right call at that time. And you could see it in their eyes that the validation of their decision was
Mhm.
huge to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
In
absolutely.
other cases, you heard guys talking about, well, I kind of screwed this thing up a little bit, whatever. Um, and I think it was good for them to put that info out to the larger group. You know what I mean? And realize that, yeah, it was probably not the best thing, but it wasn't detrimental or it wasn't a showstopper. And then just let them get through that process. You know what I mean? And so I never shit on those critical incident debriefs, man. I always thought they were value other than the first one, which I was like, we don't need to go to this bullshit. And then got there and
Hmm.
left there feeling, I'm really, really glad I was present for this thing and looked
Yeah.
forward to every single one after that. You know what I mean? Just, it was beneficial to me, but also I think as a good teammate, if my teammates were getting something out of it, then I was glad I was there to support them, even if I disagree with their decision. You know what I mean? So,
No, that's huge.
yeah. So, include your wife in shit, whether she wants to hear it or not. It's part of the fucking job.
Mhm.
Who's the dude? The emotional survival. What's that guy's name?
Gil
Gil Martin.
Martin. Yeah.
Gil Martin. I bought his book and I read it. My wife didn't, but we talked about a lot about the stuff that's in there and how the career can affect a family and that kind of shit. That the infidelity stuff, man. It is interesting, right? For all the reasons that this job does what it does to people and why that infidelity may be a thing that they're looking to fill an emotional hole in some way, shape, or form.
Hmm.
Um, I never felt that. I mean, I don't know. I think I am lucky to some degree. I just happen to find the right gal. You know what I mean? So
That's
it ain't
huge.
like
Yeah.
we've never had. It's not like we've never had a fight. We fought plenty, right? It's just that I have never ever considered that to be an option on the books. It's just
Yeah.
this is not.
Well, I think that just, even what you said, and that good on her to say, hey, Bill, I need this, and good on you to listen.
Yeah,
Right. it's really hard to walk away from that money, that addiction of the work and feeling validated, right? You feel, even those of us that don't really do it for the hero feeling, it is still a dopamine hit, right? It is still like
Absolutely.
kind of this inner hero thing. Like, hey, I got something done. I helped someone. I got this bad dude. Um, you got the cool stories. You got the yucks and the high fives. You're making money for the family and all these things, right? And for me, it was, working as much as I could at a certain point in my life so I could be available with the canine, because it's not just for, the help of the moment, but I need to get reps in to build this team, or we're not going to work when stuff hits the fan and there's a really significant call where it's either us or we're not going to find the guy. So yeah, that definitely resonates with me. And then even, to talk about the debriefs, I always appreciate, and I think that it shows we're doing something right when we, as a culture, many departments are doing more critical incident stress debriefs. And when you have someone that's experienced a whole career to say, yeah, that was helpful. And even you're starting to hear it a lot more now. I can think of a couple sergeants really close to retirement that are, they're saying it's about the guys, but that they see the value, if not for them, for the guys, or both. And just to say, yeah, I think as long as it's run okay, then it's going to be a good one, right? You can definitely screw it up. But if it's okay to good, then there's so much that confirmation, right? Validation in people's actions. And this, if nothing else, you get to decompress, say something that was messed up, and other people can agree, yeah, that was messed up. And then you don't feel so alone in that feeling, right?
Yep. That's exactly the right word, right? You feel like, man, I fucked that up, and everybody knows it, and they all hate me, and this and that, and then you find out they really wasn't that big a deal at all, and you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that those things are huge for a career, man.
Yeah, and it fills in the blanks. And I think, I say this a lot to new recruits, is that you have to find what's right for you and your spouse or your partner. And sometimes if you're like, man, I want to save the gory details, but sometimes just saying, hey, I saw something super gory. I may or may not want to need to vent to you. I talked to my buddy about it, but I'm going to be, if I'm staring off in the wall, it's probably because of that. I had this like on the edge of my brain. I wanted to protect my wife from it because it's so gnarly, but I was almost in this, like, this is so unreal. It looked like I got to tell her, because it's just, I'm not going to stop thinking about it till I do. I was like, I found a head in some bushes. And she's just like, her face got so pallid, and she just like, what? And I was like, oh, I messed up too much. Right. And it was this, for those curious, it was a car motorcycle where the motorcycle was going way too fast. And then this DUI driver turned in front of him,
I
and
remember that call.
really, and oh, it's probably a different call then.
No, this was this after I retired.
I think so. It's just I've been
Kangley?
promoted. No, a different call. So
Okay.
not uncommon. Really high speed. Someone could Lego head their self apart.
Yep,
Um,
helmet head, say
yeah,
together.
yep. So I just, I was looking in the both sides of the road. People weren't looking far enough. So I eventually found that, and not to disparage the person. This probably sounds messed up, but the whole point of this is just to talk and recognize your thoughts are not so messed up. But it made me feel better when he got ID'd and he was wanted on multiple felonies and he had a firearm. He was a convicted felon. Like, it made me feel slightly better, and I still know that there's some scrutiny there. I'm just sharing what I felt. But yeah, the other driver was DUI and he was going like 100 in frosty weather. But
Yeah.
all to say, my wife did not need to hear that. I
Yeah.
probably should have just said, hey, I saw something messed up, and then tell my buddy later. But
Yep. Yep.
yeah, man. Tell us about Tap Rack for the three people that might not know what it is and what you do.
So I started. I began teaching for the state at the basic SWAT school in like 2000 or something, 2001. And one of the other instructors there was a guy that I went to high school with. He was on Tacoma SWAT team. And so basic SWAT, at least in Washington, they're kind of little snippets of everything because we don't have much time, right? Just how the school is laid out. And so we'll, give you a classroom instruction on whatever the heck the topic is. And then they break out into squads, 10-man teams. And then each team has their own TAC officer assigned. And then I'll take like tongue taught a class on whatever. Then they come with me out and do the field exercise that's going to ingrain what you showed them in the classroom type of thing. And so we were doing that. And then from that, of course, dudes would go back and talk to their team leader about, hey, this guy Blowers mentioned this shit. And then the team leader would get home and say, hey, man, is this training that you would do and for our team? And so me and this other guy started doing that. Initially, we were doing a gratis kind of a thing. Hey, yeah, we'll cover our hotel and expenses, and we'll just come do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were in the hotel one night, and he's like, man, we should just start a business. So he and I started a business together. I think we did that for about 3 years, 2.5, 3 years. And then he moved on in life, and just, the business kind of fell apart. It was amicable. It wasn't like we were mad at each other or anything. And he wasn't interested anymore, and I still was. So started Tap Rack in 2006. I was putting a lot of my overtime into comp and of course my vacation to go teach. Initially, it was very regional. At that point, I was pretty well known in the state of Washington on the SWAT side of the house. And so I was going and doing, mainly skill-based things, I think, like, breaching and shield work and that kind of stuff. And then started to get some exposure, and of course word spreads and that kind of thing, right? And started to grow legs a little bit. So I started going to Idaho, Oregon, Washington, went up to Alaska. And then as I got closer to retirement, it's just, again, it's one of them weird things. We were camping on the east side, and the kids were still little and packing them up, and we were going to spend the night and then leave the next morning. And we both agreed, hell with us, just throw everybody in the car. They can sleep in the car, and we'll head home tonight. And driving home, I remember my wife asking me, what's the end goal? What's the, what's the 10, 15 year, 20-year plan for the Blowers and that type of shit? And I said, I think this teaching stuff is really fun to me. I like watching the light bulb come on. Certainly like it when, Eric Tung comes up to me and says, hey man, that thing you taught me may have saved my life. I appreciate it, and shit like that. The times that you get those comments. And she's like, well, why don't you do it now? And I remember telling her I don't have enough experience yet. Right. Mm. And so as I got closer to retirement, I was thinking, man, if this is what I'm going to do post police work, then I really need to start putting an effort into the business. And so I got lucky with a Facebook group called Primary and Secondary. Had a whole bunch of dudes involved in that thing. And I know the guy that owns the thing, talking to him. And so he said, hey, we need some videos. And so I put up some videos, just some shooting drills and some other stuff, talking points. I've written a couple articles, and then that kind of just blew me up a little bit. And all of a sudden I'm getting requests to go all over the damn country. So I think the year prior to me retiring, I was burned. We did not go on vacation once that year. Every single minute that I had of free time, I was going somewhere to try to build that thing up and make it work. And it's just kind of it's kind of blown up since then, man. It's like I said, I tell dudes all the time, I'm very fortunate to be able to do what I do. I don't know. Again, I guess there was concerted effort toward that last year. Now that it is what I do, there's certainly concerted effort to stay relevant and stay on top of things. But yeah, man, it's it's funny though. Initially, they were very much when I first retired, it was very much tactics related courses and a little bit of firearm stuff sprinkled in. And now over the 5 years, it's kind of flip flopped, and I'm doing way more firearm stuff than tactics. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand. I mean, I haven't kicked the door for real in over 5 years, so I think there's some people may find that I am irrelevant in that category versus dudes that have been doing it recently. But it's been great, man. It's like I said, I think it is a really good mental thing for me because I get to stay connected to coppers, get to meet dudes from around the country, hear about different stuff. And so it's been great, man. It's kind of it gets to a point where commuting on an airplane sucks, and living in a hotel sucks, and that kind of thing. But Jill's come with me on trips. That's my wife. She's come with me on some trips. If it's a cool or interesting place, she'll come along, and either before or after the class, we hang out and go look at stuff. And it's been great, man. I don't have anything bad to say about what I'm doing right now. I still love it. I still get jazzed up. I mean, there's definitely times where if it's busy, that you're like, God dang, I need some time off to, kind of refit myself. But not often. I mean, and I intentionally don't put my schedule very heavy to ensure that is the case. I mean, I got 2 weeks off right now that I'm not doing shit until my next class. So yeah.
Well, good, man. Where can people find you? And I'll have it in the show notes as well.
It's so the website's tap-rack.com. That's got this calendar on it. It's got email link. You can click it and send us an email if you're interested in some shit. On Instagram, I am Tap-Rack Tactical, all one word. On Facebook, it's Tap-Rack Tactical, but that page got hacked, and so I got control of it back, but I can't post shit to it unless it's a direct post from Instagram. and then my personal page, Bill Blowers, which is where most of the stuff happens. And I'll do like next 90 days and put those posts about what's coming up in the next 90 days around the country fairly often. So there's that stuff.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Bill. I appreciate the conversation. It was very much a learning session for me. And I know it's going to be very helpful for people in all stages of their career.
So I know you're trying to get out of here, man, but now I'm curious, right? So I know we talked 2 or 3 years ago when I think you were first starting Blue Grid up and trying to do some stuff. How's this working out for you? And was this something that you had in mind to do, or did you kind of fall into it? How this happened? Have you already told your listeners this story before? And I'm just only done it.
No, you're good. Little pieces. I think the best way to describe it is, it was an outlet, right? I had this energy. It was post the death of George Floyd. I was telling all my guys, hey, you need a backup plan. And so it was a hybrid of things. One, it was, hey, what can I actually put out with the health and fitness space, especially first responders, because it's something that I know and I'm passionate about. At the same time, I found it to be kind of therapeutic, right? You've written and reflected a lot through social media, and I started doing the same, right? Where I wrote about frustrations with police work, frustrations with how George Floyd was killed, right? Frustrations with navigating, administrative decisions that you have no control over. And then that started resonating with guys. And so it became a lot more about whatever I was working with, right? It became about recruiting because, I'm trying to help find good cops everywhere, or trying to help mentor people, even if they're, working next door, or they're working across the country, right? If I put something out that's helpful for them to be a positive force for the community, then I'm down for it. So really Blue Grit now, with the podcast is just trying to reach people that aren't going to read my, 2-3 page article on Police One or whatever. It's just trying to build the vehicle and not knowing where I want it or need it to go. But it's been good in that I'm able to connect with, truly I would not have been able or had the prerogative to sit down with you for an hour and a half and just talk about things in this structured way without this. So it's been a really good gift for me, connecting with people I know and then meeting new people, through social media, like other really great minds and resources. Selfishly, I've gotten so much out of it. And I know it's cool to see, other people, getting stuff out of it and getting feedback too. So all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, that's great, man.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks so much, man.
Is this going to be retirement gig for you?
I don't know. But I think it's, I share this with I don't know if I've concretely said this on recording, but I say this with all the people I work with, new cops, all that. But it's, hey, if you have a 20 to 30 career, that's fantastic. But we should look at that as a gift if under the right circumstances. And we're all 1 or 2 bad calls away, or not even calls, right? You could be in your personal vehicle and get T-boned and you got both your legs broken. Like maybe you don't rehab from that. Maybe you don't get medical clearance to keep doing this job. And then what? I'd love it to be a part of where I'm going. I feel like it is very much a part of where I'm going. I'm trying not to worry about the next. And that's something that's been really liberating, is just to recognize, hey, I'm ideally, I'm halfway there, but you never know. And so just to keep challenging myself, and this is certainly a challenge, and keep honing those skills, whatever they may be.
Man, that's great, man. I'm glad you're doing well with it, dude.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop the recording right here. So for all the listeners, thank you again for listening in. Like, share, subscribe, and hit up Bill. You need some good training at your PD, then you know where to find him.